Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. This is your extra show for the week. My name is Cammy Bell. I'm your host, as always, and I'm very delighted to be joined by my very good friend from overseas, Mr. Andy Barnett. Andy, thank you so much for joining us. Have you got over last Saturday's defeat at their place yet?
You have to really. Good evening, Cammy. By the way, good evening, listeners as well. Yeah, you have to really get over it. It's not a. It's never nice losing to them at any place, but given where we are and the season we've had, which seems to be a lot of transition, as I'm sure we'll get into in this pod, we've got no choice but to move on and look forward to the next game. It's a pain in the arse, and I really felt that there was an opportunity missed again against them in the league, but it seems to be a running theme. And this is the thing I don't want to happen. I don't want it to get to the stage where we go and it's like, oh, well, we expect to get beaten and we don't feel gutted afterwards. We should feel gutted because that tells us that we have more higher expectations for this team. But yeah, already starting to look forward to the weekend.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, listen, we're not going to kid people on in this, right? Anyone who's listened to our podcast before will know that we tend to provide a dose of the truth. We won't really hide away from being able just to soft soap the idea of where we're at. I think that, I wasn't, particularly confident, Andy, going into the Old Firm game about being able to win the league. I am far less so now because I think it's all done and dusted now for sure. But we still have a number of games that we have to play. We obviously have our remaining focus now on the Scottish Cup semi-final and the build-up to that, etc. For me, there's still football to be played, which I think we can make worthwhile. But listen, let's not kid ourselves. We are very, very much now solely thinking about the Scottish Cup semi-final, and then whatever next season will bring. I'll bring out the cliche now, Andy. It's going to be a big summer for Rangers.
It really is. Listen, I think when Michael Beale arrived, he had, if you like, objective for me, and I think most fans were on the same page. We felt that the league was gone already when he arrived. It was 9 points. It was never going to be easy from that point on, even though there were 3 Old Firm games, two of them at home. With that said, it was always a case of try to win one of the cups and get at least a victory, if not a better head-to-head in the remaining Old Firm games. Now, we can still achieve that, but that it all really, really relies on the Old Firm semi-final now. The league really doesn't matter at this stage now. It's gone. We want to beat them at Ibrox, but that will be a dead rubber, we expect, by the time we get to that. So it really is all about the semi-final. So Beale could really attempt to reach those objectives, I think, that he was set. He was also set with trying to turn the fortunes of the team around, getting them playing good football, get them winning the fans back on side, scoring goals, trying to concede less. And I think, to be fair, he has done that. But what we're now seeing and has been spoken on the network is those fine margins at both ends of the pitch. We've tried to fix the midfield. I think we're doing well with that. But we can clearly see that the gaps now are in that final little bit of quality. Because I don't know about you, Cammy, I did watch the game back, and I actually thought, having watched it back, we did quite well in large parts of the game. We contained Celtic. People talk about, well, they had a bad day. We made them have a bad day by playing a way in a tactical way that weakened them in all areas of the park, and we just lost out on that bit of quality. So I think once we get that, and we should do in the summer, if we can buy 3-4 quality players, spine of the team, I think we'll be okay. But meantime, yeah, we can't look too far ahead because to lose the semi-final really is unthinkable, but it's likely based on what we've seen so far. So it's hard at the moment.
Yeah, and that leads us on really nicely, Andy, to one of the main talking points really across the course of this week, which is that Ross Wilson is being mooted with a move to Nottingham Forest. This may be old news, folks, by the time that this comes to publish. Wilson may be away, but Andy, I want to take some time to be able to try and talk a little bit around Ross Wilson. He's obviously come under a lot of scrutiny, and that has been I think, across the board, whether or not it's been on various social media platforms. We've obviously spoken about it at length on the Heart and Hand podcast network. And it's now starting to come from the stands, and you've seen protests from the fans regarding Ross Wilson and Stuart Robertson. But Nottingham Forest, Andy, was the club that he was linked with. I think that it started to gain quite a bit of traction. There was an initial rumour, which I think most people didn't believe. Then the Athletic released a report, which I think was pretty close to Notts Forest, saying that they were interested in it. They've just sacked their director of football, and Ross Wilson was favourite to take over. So as I say, by the time that this comes to air, this may have already happened, but. Andy, let's talk a little bit around Ross Wilson and probably try and see what we can do to give a fair account of what he's done. And now the reason why I mention that, right, is because I've criticised him before. I think you and I have spoken about it before as well, actually. The challenge that I think Ross Wilson will have, like anyone within that position of recruitment / director of football / sporting director, whatever title you want to put on it, is that we have to follow the model that ultimately recruitment has to be bang on the money. And I think that that's the largest part of where we've seen criticism put towards Ross Wilson. We also need to make sure that we try and follow a model of being able to buy low, sell high, which is great because, if you can make, Calvin Bassey-esque profits off of a player, brilliant, because that's exactly what you want. The challenge with that, however, is that if you are winning the trophies, you are then going to have to start to rip up some of that team. And we have been culpable, Andy, of not doing that in the past after the 55 season. Maybe that was, on hindsight, the best time to be able to try and consider that. It is a tough gig, right? Ross Wilson does have my sympathy. As I say, I've criticised him before, so I'm not jumping into a fan club that I'm not already, that I don't think exists. But what I will say is there has to be a degree of level-headed assessment, and that can be tough to do as a fan. And I think that that's where we need to be able to look at the entire picture and obviously what's happened. We also need to think about if he does go, or that's certainly in the pipeline. We have to think about how do we replace him? Do we restructure? What happens? It's a big question, I think, Andy, in terms of what we do following a Ross Wilson departure.
Yes, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, I'll answer what you're saying about Ross Wilson's remit, what his remit is. Now, in any job, you're never going to get all the hiring right, especially if you're a director and you've got to hire department heads, for example, and you will make good hires and you'll make some bad hires, and that isn't any different when it comes to football. But understanding what Wilson's remit is, I think, has been a challenge for a lot of Rangers fans. When there's a problem with the ticket office website, that's not Ross Wilson's fault. Most people, level-headed people, will know that. But given that there's a lot of anger and a lot of unrest with things going on the field, when there's things off the field, we tend to try to look at people to blame. Wilson's job, obviously, as you said, as sporting director of football, was to get the player trainer model up and running, to get a successful team on the pitch, amongst other things, getting the scouting right, and ultimately making a profit for the club. And he has done that to a certain extent. And we have to, if you're going to criticise Wilson for the things that he got wrong, and there's a lot of them, for example, if he's in charge, I don't know if it is his remit. This is the thing, I don't know. The medical department seems to be failing, and it should have been upgraded some significant amount of time ago. And if we're going to criticise him for some of the transfer dealings, and we can look at players that we've brought in like Rabbi Matondo that just hasn't worked out, and many, many others there, then we also have to commend him when he has done a good job, like you said correctly. The Calvin Bassey transfer, we did very well out of that. Nathan Patterson, selling him when we did Aribo, amongst others, and some of the bargain players that we have brought on that have been successful, that we still can make a profit on, and bringing in the likes of Raskin and Cantwell. So there is a balance. We have to be fair to him. I think where most Rangers fans feel that the problem with Ross Wilson is that there's no progression on the field. There's been a regression on the field. We didn't recycle this team quick enough for whatever reason. Perhaps the money wasn't there to do so. We're constantly working in losses. So now we're working in a profit. People expect us to go and spend 20, 30 million. That just isn't there. So we have to be shrewd in how we go about our transfer business. And that's where I think Ross Wilson has slipped up significantly. I think there are a lot of untapped markets that we could have done better with. We could have sold the likes of Kamara and Barisic and Alfie and possibly Kent some time ago. But he's damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't, because if we'd sold Kent 2 years ago and Morelos 2 years ago, then we wouldn't have had the run to Seville and fans wouldn't have wanted to miss that. We could have brought in other people. So we're never going to make everybody satisfied. But I think what happens now, this is to your second point, is it's critical. It's a critical stage now for Rangers where we bring in either somebody to replace Ross Wilson who has fresher ideas, bigger scouting network, wants to upgrade the medical department, whatever it is that's in his remit, or do we restructure and do without this position altogether and actually have more departments? I don't know. I don't know what's best for the club, but it's something that I think Stuart Robertson and the board will have to really get. I think this decision is every bit as important as any other, like in a club, getting the structure right, because we are now at a stage where the next 5 years is all we can really look at, and that rebuild and that sort of recycling starts now. So yeah, I mean that's my take on it. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of what Ross Wilson has managed to do in terms of on the field. I think he has failed in about 65%, maybe 2/3 of the transfer business, Cammy. That's just my take. I think there's been a lot of disappointing transfers and a lot of players kept at the club too long. But I will concede that I don't know his job inside out, and I'm sure when he walks away, he'll look at it as being relatively successful.
Yeah, listen, I think that's fair. I think there's also the challenge around it. We have to consider the fact that, as you mentioned there, Ross Wilson is not responsible for players getting injured. Ross Wilson is not responsible for players not being able to settle in. These things are, I think, very quickly forgotten.
Yeah.
Whenever we talk about, players not being able to hit the ground running, and I think that certainly within my lifetime of us moving into a director of football model, which we've tried before, Andy, right, as well, because you'll remember the attempts that we've had of it in the past. And I think sometimes what we've tried to do is we've tried to adopt a mainland European ethos of a director of football. And within Britain, I just don't know how well it translates, right? And that's an incredibly simplistic view of how we've probably seen it. I think that the challenge can be there about being able to, as you rightly say, about the recruitment aspect of it, what the scouting network is. There's been changes to our scouting setup over the last number of years, and we haven't really been told the detail of those changes. So has that impacted Ross Wilson's hand? I would probably venture a guess that it has. So there's all of these different variables that come into it, and I think that if you are a football fan who thinks that being able to run a footballing operation, get the recruitment right, get the fitness right, being able to get the style of play right, and all that, and you think that is just based on facts, you're kidding yourself, because it just doesn't exist like that, right? You will always have uncontrollable variables, unforeseen variables that come in as part of that. What's interesting to me, Andy, is the timing of this. And again, I used the cliche before, and if I had a pound for every single time I heard a Rangers fan say this over the last number of years, you and I would probably be sitting doing this face to face on holiday, because it is another big summer for Rangers. We have to be able to get it right. You touched on the point there that being able to get someone in who might have to control this, that might have to be the remit of whoever replaces Ross Wilson as recruitment is critical. Do you feel it's better for that to happen now, or do we almost hold his feet to the fire and say, look, we're at the tail end of the season. We know that there's a lot of work has to be done here. You can go to Forest, but we would prefer you to go at the beginning of next season or midway through the summer window when all of our business has been conducted and concluded, and then you can move? Or is it a case of go now? If we've got targets in range, then we'll go after those targets.
Well, that's it. It can either go one of two ways. There's two ways to think about it. I think you outlined them both. First of all, maybe he has. Him and Michael Beale have already got all the players. I mean, there's a lot of talk that's come out of them that they've identified 5 or 6 key players and they've already got a head start on all of that. So perhaps the work is done. And in which case, if it is, then he can go now. But the other way to look at it is perhaps if he leaves now and you get somebody fresher in to change and maybe nothing has actually been done, that we've not signed anybody or had those early conversations yet with players and agents and other scouts, and somebody new comes in and says, you know what, let's change this, let's look elsewhere, let's look at a different way of doing things, and maybe that's the right way to go about it as well. I'd like to think that, and there's certainly a lot of chat about it, that there are players already that are in the process of a transfer, whether that's out of contract or that we're paying a fee for. And I'd like to think that Wilson, when he does leave, whether it's now or at the end of the season, but it looks like it's going to be now, that those deals are all but concluded. In other words, we wait for the season to finish and then they come and they sign, and that he has done his work. But if not, then I think either way he has to leave now. I don't think it makes sense if he's going to another job, then he should leave now. I don't see how that should be any different from a manager, in all honesty. But that's just me.
Yeah, listen, I think that makes sense. I think that what we then have to do, right, and I think this has been a key point for Rangers, and especially across the course of the last few months for sure, that would it hurt Rangers, in my opinion, Andy, to communicate the expectations a little bit better? And what will be interesting is, because I do think this, that some fans will start to think about season ticket renewals, my Gers renewals, because it's incredibly tough to be able to do that when you are theoretically coming out the arse end of a trophyless season. And you used the word regression before. I couldn't agree more with that term, because there has been circumstances where we've seen a malaise within the team. We've covered that often enough in terms of throughout the course of this season. That what we need to be able to do is bring in someone who can come in to deal with that. But when do we start that level of recruitment, or do we just deal with it internally? And I think Rangers fans, whilst we're incredibly passionate and sometimes can be naive, let's call it for what it is, we're also smart enough to realise that if we were to be told a message that, we are in the process of recruiting a replacement for, say, a sport director, head of recruitment, however you want to term it, but until that person is in place, that will not stop us going through our recruitment processes for whatever players or targets that we have in mind. So we are going to continue to build towards season 23-24. This won't stop us from doing that. And Rangers can just come out and be transparent with that. And that's where I think fans get frustrated. That's where I think that you've mentioned there, you're not too sure the remit, the parameters that Ross Wilson has to work in. Fans aren't so daft that they wouldn't be able to understand that if you made that easy to comprehend. And just Rangers just feel at times that they want to make that more difficult than it is by not being so transparent with it.
Absolutely right. I think you've nailed it with that. We should hear from the club. We heard this from, like you said, sources that we initially thought were not reliable at first. And of course, that tends to happen. And perhaps the club are biding their time. But absolutely, they should be communicating to the fans. If they get any common sense, they will be, to ensure that we do buy season tickets. I mean, listen, we know we will sell season tickets because we're Rangers, we're loyal to the cause, we're loyal to our club. But really, we should know. I think it's only fair to offer to your if you want to treat us like customers and not fans, then you should absolutely be giving us the best customer service possible, and that is outlining what we are expecting to get for our money. And from a fan's point of view, from an emotional perspective, again, it's the same. Tell us this is what's happening. We've got somebody else in mind, or we've got all our deals planned. We're working on various transfers. Don't worry, we're going to be there. And at least if that doesn't work out, we know that we can shout and scream at them, but maybe that's why they're not doing it. Maybe they're covering their own arses, Cammy. It's something that, and I'm not anti-board at all, I'm very pro-board, but the biggest criticism that this board has, in my view, is communication, and it has been the case for the last, I think, half a dozen years. At the beginning, it was all very positive and exciting because what we came out of prior to that. Now, I think their biggest weakness is the lack of communication, and fans can very easily mobilise together and jump on a bandwagon, and all of a sudden, as you've seen with the banners at the games about Wilson and about Robertson, and then it can steamroll, and it can pick up a lot of pace as it goes, and I don't want that. I don't think we want that as fans. We don't want it to be a case where our infighting happens again. Let's tell us what's happening, tell us what's going on. make us feel excited that we have got a good summer to look forward to with new players, new people coming in at the scouting department, medical department, whatever, and that next year we are going to compete, because we cannot afford to have another summer of poor signings, late signings, lack of activity, and then starting the season off slowly. And then having to look for a new manager because it hasn't worked out. We just can't afford to do that again. We can't afford to keep doing it. We need to have a long-term vision. So tell us what that vision is, please, and then the fans can get behind it. I 100% agree with you there.
Yeah, and I think, as I say, do that, lay a roadmap in place in terms of where we're looking to be able to try and get to, because I think part of that frustration will feel like as if we've been pretty rudderless across the course of the last couple of seasons. It's fine to be able to say that you will bring players in, you will bring signing in, and what we're looking to be able to do, but we've had a number of managers now under Michael Beale, and it's going to be offset against the silverware, and that hasn't been anywhere near what we wanted to get. And I think for me the most important thing now is for Rangers to be able to try and focus on that. If we have to replace Ross Wilson, then okay, fine. Then it's on our new chairman and the board to be able to then get that into play. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next within that regard. So yeah, I think it's very important for Rangers to ensure that every step within this process of being able to build towards next season starting in the way it has to, we're laying the foundations for that right now, and I think that's
if
fair.
it's not transparent, Cammy, we fill the vacuum. Social media fills the vacuum, and that's what we don't want. So yeah, tell us, be transparent, be clear with us, let us know what's happening one way or another, and then that way we can stop all the nonsense surrounding it. But yeah, interesting times ahead, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, let's talk about obviously the next step in that chapter, which is our game at home on Saturday against St Mirren. So there's obviously, it's that double-edged sword, Andy, as we kind of spoke about there. We beat Celtic at Parkhead. Everybody's on a high. We've cut the gap down to 9 points. Everyone's absolutely loving it. Not the way it turned out. It's going to be pretty important for me to say that I think that the crowd on Saturday will be supportive of the team, right? Because I think that whilst we're frustrated, we are seeing better performances against Celtic. But the most important thing for us now is to be able to try and get this team into a decent shape for the Scottish Cup semi-final. I don't know your thoughts if you now want to be able to use these remaining league games and the build up to that to look about is this a new opportunity for a new shape? Is this an experiment that we can get into? One of the things that I'm really keen to get your thoughts on, Andy, is Alfredo Morelos and his inclusion within that, because I've mentioned in the past I'm not really too sure what we're doing with Morelos. I think most people I speak to now are of the same opinion that they want to see Alfredo Morelos leave Ibrox in the summer. They don't believe that a recontract is worth it now. I'm fairly sure you're very much in that space as well.
I am, yeah.
So I don't really know what the value is, and in terms of us continuing to play him, I don't think he really kicked his own arse that much against Celtic at Parkhead. What we're going to get out of him a semi-final at Hampden, I don't know. Is this us now potentially bringing Cholak into the fold and getting some minutes behind him and getting his confidence up, maybe getting some goals? Who knows what could happen? But it feels like we're in that really weird space.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm not sure why Michael Beale is persisting with him if he is going to leave, and all the noises are that he is going to leave. I think it's a very small minority now of Rangers fans that would keep him. I don't know what Morelos offers us. Now, the argument prior to him playing ahead of Cholak was that Morelos would offer us a bit more, like his movement is bringing opponents, dragging them out and bullying them and bringing other players in our team into play. He isn't doing that. He's not doing any of that. He's not scoring goals. I mean, he's had a couple here and there, but I don't know what Morelos actually offers us now. I think the last few months we've seen very, very little, a couple of decent games, and that's it. I don't see what a Sakala or even Cholak. Now, Cholak is not great off the ball. He doesn't seem to fit into Michael Beale's system. That's fine. But is it not worth trying at least to see what he can do in these games, or play Sakala through the middle? The other one is Ryan Kent. Kent, I think, looks like he's got one eye out the door. His last few performances have been woeful, I think, and I don't think that's being unfair. I thought he was the worst player on the park at the weekend, and that's saying something when you look at how poor some Rangers performances have been. What's the point in playing these guys? And again, the argument will be, well, we've got the semi-final to look to. We've got these guys are going to play. Why? What do they give us? What is Kent giving us? He had one great moment against Celtic in 3 years. Well, certainly since we won the league, 2.5 years. The same for Morelos, done nothing. Why not play other players? Why not get Sakala and Cholak? And I mean, what can they do any worse? I don't think so. It doesn't feel to me like they can. Also, to answer your other question, like would we look at maybe changing a system, trying to bring in guys like Alex Lowry, and maybe give Devine some game time. Hopefully, Robbie McCrory. It's the goalkeeper is another big issue. I think this is the time to do it now. The league is done. And why not try out other players who haven't let us down? This group of players has let us down more often than not, and I don't know what they've done to deserve to keep their place. And if you can't use these opportunities now to give other players a chance, these squad players, then when can we? Maybe Michael Beale has absolutely no faith in the likes of McCrory and Lowry and Sakala and Chola. And if that's the case, well, then we've got maybe bigger problems than we first realised, because if they're not in the plans, then we'll be having a major clear out this summer, not just a kind of half clear out that we expected. So, yeah, I want to see these guys given a game, because I think that they deserve it, and I think the players who have been playing Cammy do not, and that's, I think, a bigger worry. These guys haven't worked hard enough to keep their place in the team, despite winning a lot of games in the league. It's been, I think, through good performances from other players around the park and the input from the likes of Raskin and Cantwell and Tav's consistency, Barisic's improvement. I think these are the guys that have helped drag us forward. Sakala is another one that when he's come in, he seems to have done quite well. But the other players that have been there for some time, and I include Kamara now and Lundstrom, I wouldn't play them at all. If they're going to leave, don't play them. It's not worth it. But I understand why some people say, well, if we're paying them a wage, we might as well use them, but not if they're not going to contribute.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, because let's face it, and as much as I hate to say it, because no one wants to sit here and hear this phrase, but we pretty much have 90 to 120 minutes worth of competitive football left across the course of this season now. And I think that you are right. I think that there's a question that has to be asked about some of the players, where their attitude has been, where they're at mentally. I know that I think Tess and I spoke last week about on one of the pods on the network about, if you were to get rid of 6 players, who would they be? And he and I came to not far off the kind of same group of players, but that's still a major change. That's still a lot of personnel. And whilst you might be talking about, okay, well, give those guys that you've just mentioned, so the McCrorys, the Lowrys, etc., a chance, those guys, you've got a very small number of games to be able to let them bed into a team before they then face that semi-final. And then that's where I think the manager will go back to, the regular personnel from within that space as well. I think St Mirren, for me, whether or not he changes the personnel would be interesting. I think what he might do, Andy, or what he's kind of flirted with the idea that we saw against Dundee United, is look at the shape. He wants to be able to try and play in a certain way. What will be interesting, though, is that I'm fairly certain that shape very much centred around what he wanted to do with a defence that featured Connor Goldson. And at the moment in time, I think the current understanding is that Goldson will not feature against St Mirren on Saturday. That does change the optic for sure.
Yeah, I think in order to get the best out of some of this players, a formational change is probably worthwhile, but we are restricted if Goldson's not available. We only have really 2 centre defenders. If Leon King's still out, you can maybe bring Lundstrom back. I don't know, but I think what we can all safely agree is that our most potent output is still Tav, and he's the fullback. And I think maybe to get more out of him, you want to have more cover at the back. So a 3 at the back type thing could work. And then the likes of Tav and either Barisic or hopefully Yilmaz will give us continue to give us this threat, because that's where Tav's is best. That's what he does so well for us. And I think maybe a formational change, now's the time to try it. Why not? Why do we need 4 at the back for most of these Scottish games? Again, but the challenge then is that when we come up against Celtic or when we go into Europe next year, we might not be able to get away with that. So maybe it's definitely worth experimenting with. I don't know how he can possibly do it without Goldson, because I wouldn't trust Lundstrom to play that role, and as I say, I don't think we have any other central defenders other than Sutter and Davis. So. And not available at the moment. So yeah, I don't see him changing it too much. He might experiment for parts of the game, but I don't think it'll be for a full 90 minutes. We'll see three at the back, I have to say.
And I do want to touch on John Sutter on that for just a moment as well, because a horrendous mistake at Parkhead, Andy, right? Let's not take anything away from it. I do understand what he was trying to do in terms of just being able to try and play a relatively simple pass back to the goalkeeper. I know that there's been obviously a lot of focus in the fact that Al McGregor is not sprightly, but the angle of that pass back, I think, would have made it difficult for any keeper to be able to chew up the ground before Jota eventually linked onto the ball. And we all saw what happened. So, a poor mistake. There's a point to this where I think that we need to consider. I would have kept John Sutter involved even if Connor Goldson was fit, very simply for the reason that I would like him to be able to try and get time in. He's had a poor start to his time at Rangers because of injury. I'm sure that mistake at Parkhead has absolutely impacted his confidence. We need to be responsible for being able to try and rebuild that, because we're going to have to rely on him for next year. He was brought in for a reason, right? Which I think is the most simplistic way I can say it. I want to be able to try and give him more game time and give him that, even though I could totally understand some fans saying, nah, I would keep him out just now. He doesn't deserve to come in and get a starting berth. Goldson's injury almost certainly means that he starts by default. Even if Goldson is fit, right? Let's just hope for a minute, in our wildest dreams that Connor Goldson is fit to play on Saturday. For me, I would still like to see John Sutter involved at some point, just purely to allow him that chance to do what he can to recover from that mistake, but just to get some time in first team football in competitive matches.
Yeah, listen, I thought you actually had not a bad game up until that mistake, but this is the difference. It's those fine margins. It was the same with Ben Davis. He'd had an okay game. I thought they'd managed the Celtic front line fairly well. Of course, Kyogo, you give him time in the box, he's going to score as he did, but it was our own mistakes that caused that. John Shooter's a good defender. He's a very able, solid Scottish defender, but he's also a good footballer, Cammy. He knows how to pass the ball out, to bring the ball out. I think he does offer us quite a lot. And I think without Goldson, he will start. But I think he's somebody that we have to try to trust and build up. The other thing I was going to say was the thing with Goldson and these injuries, it just seems to be that we have key injuries at the worst possible moments throughout this season. Right at the start, it was Tom Lawrence, just as he was kicking into gear, injured. Ben Davis, injured. Yilmaz, he's got a few games under his belt, injured. Goldson has been very consistent, injured. And it seems to have been at key moments throughout the season. Raskin again was out for a little bit. You just hope that next season that we maybe get a bit better luck with that, because it has been at key moments. If you look throughout this season, Hadji was out for the whole year. Helander, Roof, we know about, but to the players that have come in and that were in the squad, it has been at key moments and it's cost us and disrupted our setup significantly. So that's definitely something that if it does change next year, will have a huge impact on the team. But Suter, for me, I think he has got something to offer. I wouldn't think he's going to be first choice. I'd like to see us sign one, maybe two centre backs in the summer, especially with Helander leaving. But I think as maybe a third choice or a guy who could play in a back three, I think he'll be fine, particularly in games in the SPFL.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think, as I say, what he needs is a consistency of as you mentioned there, the run of games. Yeah, being able to try and get into it. And it's just, as much as I hate to say it, it's just our luck that we would throw him in a game at Parkhead, which, let's face it, he was not going to be playing in had Connor Goldson been fit. And then, and I agree with you, by the way, I think that's totally right about how well he played, because I actually didn't think he looked out of place. I genuinely didn't. The challenge, though, with that is, even when you're playing really well and then you make such a pivotal mistake, sometimes that hurts twice as much. And I think that's where, Again, it's really important, I think, for us to be able to support him in the right way, get him out of any challenging mindset that he might have around whether or not he can participate within that, and use that as an opportunity, because you talk about luck. That's just his luck. Do you know what I mean? That's what happens to us, and that's what's happened, I think, in pretty much most positions throughout the team across the course of this season. I don't think I'm alone in saying, Andy, that the sooner this season is done, the better.
Oh, yeah, and something else as well. And McGregor, although it wasn't his fault, he has to take a little bit of responsibility. Well, it's not him; it's the club, because we have a 41-year-old goalkeeper that's never been able to run playing that position. I think John Sutter will absolutely be fine with a sweeper keeper behind him. And you see teams like, you watch the way most teams play now. You just saw Man City last night, and of course I know it's a different level, but Ederson plays almost like a sweeper for them, which means that if there's any little mistakes that happen in the back, and they do happen, by the way, even the best defenders in the world can make a short pass, that the keeper is switched on and is almost like another player, another outfield player who can mop up. And I think if we sign a keeper that does that, I think that those kind of mistakes can be covered. And of course, we don't want them to happen in the first place, but you have to account for the occasional brain fart. All defenders have them. Unfortunately, ours seem to have had more than most. So I think another keeper, and he might have got away with that. A faster keeper comes out, clears the ball, boots it out the park, and we can forgive him. But yeah, it led to the goal, which ultimately cost us. So and made us lose the game. So hopefully he will have got over that, and a good solid couple of performances in the next couple of games will pick his confidence back up. And I think the whole team could do with that. You know, that it's a game, it's done, but what's the point? You got to move forward. You got to move forward to the next game. St Mirren at home, it should be a formality for us winning it. Of course, we'll probably make it hard for ourselves, but if everybody does the basics right, which is what we didn't do, then we'll come out hopefully with a comfortable victory and a few goals and a bit of entertainment to give the fans a bit of fresh excitement as we go to the remaining part of the season.
Listen, I think that's totally fair. I think what we need to be able to try and do is almost treat these next couple of games as the build up. Yeah, to be able to try and get there, get as you say, the confidence up, be able to look at if the manager wants to make any tweaks or anything like that to it, then that's fine, because again, I don't believe it's like Dundee United. I don't believe that the result will ever be in doubt. And maybe, as much as no one really wants to be able to ever get a Rangers team that can concede a league, we know we're all realists, right? We do live in the real world, where I think everyone kind of knows where we're now in, and where we're the position that we're facing. Most important thing, I think, for that now, Andy, is to be able to use these next handful of games, as you say, to build up the confidence, get into a more consistent space from a team performance perspective, because we can win games, right? And we have done that under Michael Beale. There is zero doubt to that. But I think that he himself has said, and we've mentioned a number of times, that where we feel the performances could be better, that is confidence. That is been able to make sure that players feel that they are, just sweeping teams aside. I want us to be able to try and see how much we can get into that mindset before the trip to Hampden. That for me is key.
Yeah, I think we have to see a lot more from the front line, whoever plays there, because that's the front four players, if you like, are the ones that it will excite the crowd. And we're a fickle crowd, especially at Ibrox. You got to get fans behind the team early on, and sometimes 20 minutes it's 0-0. It can be hard. Away from home, maybe less so, because it's a different type of experience. You get really more kind of vociferous crowd support back in the team. But at Ibrox, I want the front players to be on the front foot, no pun intended, and go for it, and not have those kind of 3-on-2 situations that end up in a slack pass. Be clinical. Get shots and goal. Test the opponents. At St Mirren, they won't be that great at the back. And if you can get the fans behind the team early doors with fluid attacking play with that front four, then everybody else's job will be a lot easier, and the fans will have a much better experience at the game. But if it's that kind of slack play that sometimes happens, a couple of early flurries don't lead to a goal, and then we slow the game down, and we don't counter attack quick enough and everything else. We know what it's going to be like, and we'll win 1 or 2-0, and that's fine. But that's not what Bale wants. He wants to have that perfect performance where we attack with pace and we're clinical at both in front of goal and when covering at the back. So we've got to see that now. I think the players, all the fans, a good performance. But like you said, it's got to be with a view of what we've got the cup semi-final in a couple of weeks. Let's try to get the confidence back up. Let's try to find something that at least gives the fans some belief that when we go into the game against Celtic at Hampden, that we have a chance. I mean, we'll always have a puncher's chance, but this is Rangers. We should be, and we showed that we're not a million miles away from, but if we can just be that bit more sharp, then we have a real chance of beating them, and that has to start at the weekend.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think the most important thing for us now is to be able to try and build on that as much as we possibly can. Let's put that defeat at Parkhead behind us because we still have a trophy that we can compete for. So yeah, that'll be very interesting. And as I say, the next step is beating St Mirren at home on Saturday afternoon. Thank you to our executive producers in London, Mr. Mike Lee, Mr. Paul Myers. David will be back with you on Flagship on Monday, as per usual. A huge thanks to my very special guest this week, Mr. Andy Barnett. Andy, a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for coming on, and it's always great to be able to talk to you about all things Rangers.
Yeah, thanks very much, Cammy. Hopefully we'll get a result this weekend.
Absolutely. If you'd like to hear more from Andy, myself, and all of the rest of the gang at Heart and Hand, why not jump over to our Patreon site, which is patreon.com/Heart and Hand. For only a couple of quid a month, you can get up to 5 shows a day. So please jump on over and check it out if you haven't already. Thanks so much for your time, folks. We'll speak to you again on Monday. Have a brilliant weekend, and here's to a great performance and 3 points on Saturday. Thanks all.